that is performed to eliminate outside influences or biases and ensure consistent results, scientists begin to have more confidence in the principle, and they call it either a theory or a law. So what about science and society? What's that? When I say science is affected by culture, what do we mean by that? Science is affected by culture, or culture is affected by society. What do you think?
Science is affected by culture in the way we won't explore anything that makes us uncomfortable outside of our.
That's exactly right. You know, years ago, back in the 50s and early 60s, when we conducted experiments, they were questionable, right? We don't do that today. You know, we don't, we make sure that when we conduct an experiment, no one's hurt. Right? And we even now have an ethics committee for animals, right? You know, when I gave Prozac to the pregnant rats, I had to go before an ethics committee. You know, so our animals are protected as well. So. Anatomy and physiology are branches of biology concerned with the form and function of the body. So here's where the terminology comes in. Gross anatomy. I want you to know that gross anatomy is what we can see only with our eyes. This is before microscopes are invented. So it's only what we can see with our eyes. Gross anatomy. Microscopic anatomy. So when microscopes were invented, we actually break this up into two categories: cytology and histology. So cytology is the study of cells. And that's easy to remember because cells start with a C and so does cytology, right? So you can't get that wrong. Cytology is the study of cells. Histology is the study of tissues. Histology is the study of tissues. So what do you think we use these microscopes for when we're studying cells and tissues? What's a big thing that we're using for? Diagnostics. I mean, what's one big thing that we diagnose by looking at cells under a microscope? It starts with a C.
Cancer.
You've got it. Cancer. Cancer. There's
Tissues, right? Histology is the study of tissues.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay. You have to excuse my drawings. I am not the best drawer. But I want to show you something. I want to show you how we determine, a very basic understanding of how we determine whether a tumor or these cells are benign or they're cancer. So what we do, let's say, and we're going to pretend here, that these are all the same size. These are normal cells, right? No problem at all. Well, now let's say that we start to see something like this. Now they're abnormally shaped, right? That's called atypical because they're abnormally shaped. Now that still doesn't mean a person has cancer, right? It could mean that they just have a cyst. Okay, then we start to see something like this. So now we have abnormally shaped cells and they're multiplying. Okay? When they multiply like this, it's called hyperplasia. You put the two words together and you have atypical hyperplasia, right? So the more cells that are atypical and they're multiplying, and we see this under a microscope, we can determine, hey, this is now malignant, right? Or we could say, you know what? It's not quite cancer yet. So we're going to call it atypical hyperplasia. Okay? So let's pretend that this is atypical hyperplasia. A and H. Okay, atypical hyperplasia. So then we come over here and we do this. This is what we see. Okay. A little more, so another row. A little more multiplied, right? They're a little more abundant now. So this is how we diagnose. So this is atypical hyperplasia. This would be malignant. Okay? And this is what people do every day in the lab. They look at these slides and they say, okay, atypical, malignant. And what we do in this country, which I don't really understand, if a patient has, let's say they feel a lump on the breast, and we go in, we do a biopsy, and we say they have an atypical hyperplasia. What do you think we do? What do we
Watch it.
Yeah. And we wait until it becomes malignant. Does that make any sense? I used to work in third world countries and they remove it. They remove it right away. But here we don't. We wait and we monitor, and I'm not quite sure why. Because all the patients I've seen over the years that had just atypical hyperplasia, it all turned. It all went to cancer.
That's what happened to my daughter. So when they found her tumor, her cancer in her eye, she had one here. They waited, by the time, within less than a month, she had 16. And then by the time they even decided to do anything, she had 32. So by the time she had 32, we had already left Texas. But they just, here they just waited.
Yeah, and it's kind of the protocol in the United States. That's what we do. We encourage people to do self-breast exams and self-testicular exams. And then when they do find a lump, they tell them, okay, well, you gotta go to the doctor, right? They have to feel it, and then they have to set up appointments for you to have a mammogram, an ultrasound. It should be right away. You should be able to go into any hospital. I don't care where it is. You should be able to go in and say, hey, I felt a lump on my breast. They should be able to take you right in, do a mammogram, do an ultrasound, and if there's something suspicious, have a biopsy set up, within a day. I mean, that's really what should happen. Unfortunately, it doesn't. And when you're talking about aggressive types of cancer, time is of the essence. I mean, the sooner you diagnose and you take care of it, the better. So I want you to know the definition of anatomy. Anatomy is the science of the structure of an organism and the relationship of its parts. I want you to know that verbiage for the quiz. We've already talked about gross anatomy. It just relies on your eyes during dissection. Physiology is the study of tissues. And you don't have to worry about regional. So we have different groups of anatomy. We have developmental anatomy. What do you think that is? Sure, yeah, from the time the baby's conceived all the way to old age. Pathological anatomy, yeah, study of diseases. Systemic anatomy, study of systems like skeletal, cardiac. So you want to know the verbiage here for these terms? Developmental anatomy is the study of human growth and development. Pathological anatomy is the study of diseased body structures. Systemic anatomy is the study of the body by systems. And of course, the systems could be skeletal, muscular, etc. You don't have to worry about surface anatomy. Okay, physiology. If you were to explain to someone in layman terms what physiology is, how would you explain it?
Thank you.
It's what? Or different?
The way the body works.
Okay.
It's more like the physical appearance other than like anatomy, which is psychology.
Okay, so anatomy, like if I say to you, I'm going to focus on the anatomy of the kidney. Okay, what am I talking, what kind of questions do you think I would ask you? Yeah, where they're located, right, the structure of the kidney. But if I say to you, I'm going to ask you questions regarding the physiology of the urinary system.
The GFR.
Well, yeah, the GFR. I'm going to be talking about how the kidneys work, right? The function of the kidneys. We'll talk. So speaking of that, how would you, what comes to mind when I say, what is the function of the kidneys?
Filtration.
You got it, yeah, filtration. And how does it do it? By excreting waste, which is through our urine, right? Good. So you want to think of the kidneys as being a plumbing system for our urine and for our blood. Why for our blood, do you think?
Is it filters toxins out of the blood?
It sure does. So just take proteins, for instance. When the proteins reach the kidneys, right? Well, we don't want those proteins to come out in the urine, right? So the kidneys will filter and make those proteins much better than before they arrive to the kidneys. And then what's going to happen? Those proteins are going to be reabsorbed back into the blood in much better shape. Okay, so that's the physiology of a system, or in this case, the kidneys. So physiology, organism involved, human or plant physiology, organizational level, molecular or cellular, and then of course the systemic function. We're going to go through all of these between this semester and next. Respiratory, neuro, cardiovascular. Okay, some more terminology for you. I want you to know what autopoiesis is. Auto kind of tells you that it's automatic, right? So that gives you a little hint. So autopoiesis is living organisms that are self-organized and self-maintained. Would you say that we are an example of autopoiesis? Yeah, we sure are, right? Because we are self-organized. Every organ in our body actually relies on the other organs, right? Every organ relies on each other to function properly. And it's self-maintaining in the sense it's automatic. We don't have to tell our heart to beat. We don't have to tell our liver to work or our kidneys to work. It just does it. Cell theory, I want you to know, if it is made up of one or more cells, it's alive. Okay, it only takes one cell. And metabolism. Now I know you guys all heard of metabolism, right? And especially if you're trying to lose weight, and you know, with women it's much harder because we tend to have a slower metabolism than men. So you could be dieting with a male friend, and you can eat the same thing and have the same activity, and he's gonna lose weight faster. It's not fair. I know. But I want you to know that metabolism is the sum total of all physical and chemical reactions occurring in the body. I want you to think about what that says. Sum total of all physical and chemical reactions occurring in the body. And now I want you to think about what happens when the metabolism starts to slow down, either from a pathology or just from the natural aging process. How do you think it affects our bodies?
It slows down the whole body.
It slows down everything, right? So how does the patient feel when their metabolism starts to plummet?
Lethargic.
Yeah, they don't have energy. What happens to their weight?
Increase.
They gain weight, right? And as we will see moving forward in this class, when we start throwing in pathologies, it will also affect the metabolism. And once that metabolism starts to slow down, it can open up the door for lots of different things to occur. And that's why we're more vulnerable when we get older and that metabolism declines. We're more vulnerable to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, etc. Okay. I want you to add something to this. We might as well do it now. I want you to know that in order for metabolism to occur, we have to have three things. In order for metabolism to occur, we have to have three things. We have to have ATP, which is what? Energy. We have to have ATP. And we have to have something called catabolism. What's catabolism? I'm sorry? I think I heard it. Yes, you got it, you got it. It's the breaking down of, it breaks down larger molecules into smaller ones. And breaking down. And we have to have anabolism. And what's anabolism? It's just the opposite of catabolism.
The buildup.
It builds up. So what we're going to do is take smaller molecules and make them into larger molecules. So we're building up. And in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be giving you examples of catabolism and anabolism. Okay, levels of organization. Organization of chemical structures separates living material from non-living material. Organization of atoms, molecules, macromolecules result in living matter. A gel called cytoplasm. Okay, I want you to know that cytoplasm is essential for life. It is a gel that is essential for life. That's what I have here. Cytoplasm is essential material for life. Death occurs when proper relationships between chemical elements are not maintained. And we're going to talk about this in chapter 1, part 2, when we talk about homeostasis. And this is just a nice little visual showing you how the levels of organization, we start way up here with the chemical level. You guys have had chemistry. Has he talked about atoms and molecules and all that stuff? Okay, good. I will be talking about it too next week. So we'll be talking about atomic weight and things like that. So we have the organelle levels. We have cellular level, tissue level, and organ level. All of these systems, these organ systems, we will go over between this course and next semester. Integumentary system is what? Skin. Yeah, skin, hair, and nails. Skeletal system, muscular, cardiovascular, endocrine, nervous system, reproductive, urinary, digestive, respiratory, and lymphatic immune system. We're going to cover all of these. So organelles, I'm sure you guys have heard of the mitochondria. You heard of that? Yeah, it's the powerhouse of the cell. I want you to know that. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's going to have lots of ATP, right? Lots of energy. So all of our cells have ATP, but we see a lot of ATP and mitochondria in muscles, right? Why? Because we're always what? We're always moving, okay? So we have lots of ATP in our muscle cells. What about the Golgi apparatus? Ever heard of that one? What's the Golgi apparatus? Does anyone know? Does it store protein? Yes, I mean, yes it does. So I want you to think of the Golgi apparatus as the post office of the cell. And you're right, what it's going to do, it's going to have these proteins, and it's going to package them up all nice and neat and send them out for export. That's why I said, think of the Golgi apparatus as the post office of the cell. And we'll go into more detail as we move forward. What about the endoplasmic reticulum? Well, the endoplasmic reticulum, you wanna think of, it's kind of like the highway of the cell. And we have two types. We have a smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and then we have a rough endoplasmic reticulum. Do you know what makes the rough endoplasmic reticulum rough? It's called ribosomes. Ribosomes attach to the endoplasmic reticulum. And what's the function of the ribosomes? Do you remember that? It's to synthesize something that starts with a P. You got it, proteins. Synthesize proteins. I always tell my students, when you guys take the ed class, I'm gonna be in your pocket. Saying it starts with a P, starts with a C. All right. So organelles cannot survive outside the cell, and cells cannot survive without organelles. Okay, so I want you to know that. We have lots of organelles. Some we haven't even identified yet. But for this class, we're only going to go over a few. Okay. We've already talked mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticulum, and I will add a few more in the upcoming chapters. So mitochondria, you want to know that it's the powerhouse of the cell. It's where all the ATP is going to be. Golgi apparatus is a set of sacs that provides a packaging service to the cell by storing material like proteins for future internal use or for export from the cell. And the endoplasmic reticulum is a network of channels within the cell that acts as a highway for the movement of chemicals and as sites for chemical processing. Cellular, each cell has a nucleus surrounded by a cytoplasm within a limiting membrane. What cell in our body doesn't have a nucleus? You got it, the blood cell. The blood cell is the only cell that doesn't have a nucleus. And why? Because it's a liquid. Cells differentiate to perform unique functions. I want you to know that cells are the smallest and the most numerous units. And every single cell in our body, every single one, has a specific function. And they also have a limited lifespan. So when those cells die off, new cells will replace them and will perform the identical function. So we have fat cells that permit the storage of fat. You know, we usually associate fat as being a bad thing, but fat is actually very good because as we move forward, you're going to see that all of our major organs are surrounded by fat. And that fat is protection for our organs, so it's a good thing. Cardiac muscle, cells can contract with great force. Muscles, bones, nerves, and blood cells are other examples of structurally and functionally unique cells. And again, we're going to cover all of them. Organs represent discrete and functionally complex operational units. Each organ has a unique size, shape, appearance, and placement in the body. And you're going to see this as we move forward. It's not by accident that the heart is the size of a fist, right? If it's bigger, it would refer to it as what?
Cardiomegaly.
cardiomegaly, where the heart is enlarged, and that can cause lots of problems. An organ is an organization of several different kinds of tissues to perform a special function. So for example, the heart is an example of an organ level. Muscle and connective tissues give it shape and pump blood. Epithelial tissue line the cavities. The nervous tissue permit control of the pumping contractions of the heart. So this is what I meant when all of our organs really rely on the other organs to support them. And you'll see when you're seeing patients that have, let's say they have renal issues, chances are they have cardio issues too, right? So, and that makes it harder to treat when they have two major things going on. System level involves varying numbers and kinds of organs arranged to perform complex functions. The living human organism is greater than the sum of its parts. All of the components interact to allow the human to survive and flourish. Okay, let's go over some more terms. Anatomical position is the universal reference position, and it's like this. Okay, why is this even important?
So we know what body is left and right.
You
forward
got
and
it.
backward.
It sounds easy. You're probably thinking, well, of course I know what my left and right is. But we have to have this reference, this universal reference position that is used everywhere. Body erect with arms at sides, palms forward, head and feet pointing forward. If we cut the body in half, just like this, it's called bilateral symmetry. And as you notice, it's a mirror image of each other, okay? It's the same. So bilateral symmetry confers balanced proportions or mirror images of each other. And for right now, I want to introduce you to these two terms. And I will bring them up next semester when we talk about the nervous system and we talk about strokes, okay? But right now, I want you to know that ipsilateral structures are on the same side of the body. Contralateral structures are on the opposite side of the body. Okay, please know those two terms. And I've already said this. Bilateral symmetry, mirror images of each other. The terms ipsilateral and contralateral are used to identify the placement of one body part with respect to another on the same or opposite side of the body. Any questions so far? Are you okay? It's pretty straightforward. Major body cavities. Major body cavities. Let's start with the easiest one first. Dorsal body cavities is in orange. And what does dorsal mean? It means back, right? So in your notes, you want to put dorsal and posterior mean back. Dorsal and posterior mean back. And for the dorsal cavities, we have the cranial cavity, which houses the what?
brain.
The brain houses the brain. And then we have the spinal cavity that houses the spinal cord. Excellent. And then we have the ventral body cavities, and they're important. The ventral body cavities. So in your notes, you want to put ventral and anterior means front. Ventral and anterior mean front. So we have more ventral body cavities. So let's look at them. This first one is the thoracic cavity. Okay, it's all of this here. The thoracic cavity, I want you to think of chest. Okay, thoracic chest. And then within the thoracic cavity, we have the pleural cavities. And what do you think is in the pleural cavities?
Lungs.
You got it, our lungs, and that's what pleural means. So if I ask you on a test, where do the lungs lie? You're gonna tell me in the pleural cavity. Now, if your patient has lung cancer, and we're trying to determine if it's operable, we actually will send them to a thoracic surgeon, right? And they will go in and they'll see where that tumor is, where the cancer is, and determine if it's operable or not. Because they gotta go through the chest, obviously. Okay, then we have the mediastinum. Now, the mediastinum is below the chest, below the thoracic cavity. And one big organ that's in the mediastinum is the heart. Okay, and I'm going to give you more in a minute, but the heart is one big organ that's in that mediastinum. And then right below the mediastinum, we have the diaphragm. Okay, we have the diaphragm. And the apex of the heart actually, rests on that diaphragm. So, I want to show you. There's a nerve that innervates the diaphragm. And it actually originates way up here in the cervical plexus. Cervical means neck. So it originates way up here. Do you know the name of it? Anybody know? The nerve that innervates the diaphragm. You got it, the phrenic nerve. And it's pronounced with a P. So it's P-H-R-E-N-I-C, phrenic nerve. This phrenic nerve, because it originates up in the neck, if you have a patient that's let's say they're in a car accident and they break their neck, well, if that phrenic nerve is compromised or damaged in any way, and you already know that it innervates the diaphragm, how is the patient going to present? They can't breathe, right? They can't breathe. So, again, we're going to go into more detail about that. We'll talk about the nervous system next semester. And then we have the abdominal cavity. What do you think's in the abdominal cavity? One organ you can't miss. You got the stomach. The stomach is in the abdominal cavity. What else do you think? Yeah, the spleen, the liver, yeah, all those good things. Pancreas. And then we have, most of the time now, we just refer to both of them together and we say abdominal pelvic cavity. Okay? And then we have just the pelvic cavity. But usually it's just abdominal pelvic. So ventral body cavities, we've already talked about. Thoracic cavity will house the right and left pleural cavities, Inside the pleural cavities, we have the lungs. Right below the thoracic cavity, we have the mediastinum, abdominopelvic cavity, and then of course we break it down into abdominal and pelvic. So for your quiz in your exam, I want you to know what's in the abdominal cavity. I want you to know what's in the pelvic cavity, and I want you to know what's in the mediastinum. So, I've said this before, I don't like the way I wrote this. So, for the lungs, they're in the pleural cavity, that's easy, okay? If I were you, I would change this and I would put mediastinum equals. And then I would start rating everything that is in the mediastinum. The heart, trachea, right and left bronchi, esophagus, thymus, various blood vessels, thoracic duct, and other lymphatic vessels, various lymph nodes, and nerves are all in the mediastinum. Okay, but I would rewrite this. I don't know, to me it just seems backwards. I would have mediastinum equals all these things. For the abdominal cavity, I want you to know that it holds the liver, the gallbladder, stomach, pancreas, intestines, spleen, kidneys, and ureters. And then I want you to stop there. Okay, what are ureters? Yeah,
Cheers.
very, very good. So ureters go from the kidney to the bladder. Okay, ureters. And then in the pelvic cavity, we're going to have the bladder, certain reproductive organs, and part of the large intestine. Remember I said I give multiple choice quizzes and exams, so I probably will do something like, all of the following are in the abdominal cavity except, and, I may put reproductive organs.
Making sure it's pleural cavity.
Because that's part of the pelvic. Any questions on this?
So for the quiz, you said we had to know the abdominal, the pleural, and the mediastinum.
Yes, exactly, absolutely. Any other questions? We're good? Okay. And then the dorsal, we've already talked about, cranial and spinal. You want it, that's easy. What's in the cranial cavity, the brain, what's in the spinal cavity, the spinal cord. Okay. Okay. So, when we talk about body regions, we break it into two types, or two sections. Axial skeleton and appendicular skeleton. So axial skeleton is the head, the neck, and the torso, or trunk. Appendicular is going to be the upper and lower extremities, so the arms and legs. So here's a really nice visual of the axial skeleton and the appendicular. Everything in purple is going to be axial. So if I ask you on a quiz, the ribs are located where? In the axial or the appendicular? What are you going to tell me? Axial, right? What about the clavicle? You're right, it is appendicular, but why? It looks like it should be axial. Why is it appendicular? Yeah, it's actually attached to the shoulder, which is part of her arm. So it's appendicular. Okay. What about the femur? Appendicular, the big left bone here. Good, very good. Okay, I'm going to point out some terms, just because they're here, that I want you to know, I want you to be familiar with. I want you to know that cephalic means head, you to know that the zygomatic bone is our cheekbone. Zygomatic. Right here. I want you to know that carpal is our wrist bones, the carpal bones. I want you to know that inguinal is the groin area. You've heard of an inguinal hernia. That's exactly where it is, in the groin area. I've already told you that thoracic refers to chest. Thoracic refers to chest. Over here, cervical is neck. This is going to help you. If you can remember cervical is neck, then when we talk about the cervical vertebrae, where do you think it is? It's in the neck. Thoracic vertebrae is actually right in the middle. What's the last set of vertebrae? The lumbar. You got it, the lumbar. Flank is on the sides, so it's referring to our side. If you're working in a hospital setting, the staff say, you know, the patient has flank pain, and they're talking about side pain. This one's a big one. Popliteal. I want you to know that popliteal refers to the back of the knee. And a patient can suffer from something, it's very common. It's called a popliteal cyst or a Baker's cyst. They're the strangest things because you're perfectly fine and you wake up one day and you got this big thing behind your knee. Sometimes they're very painful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they go away as quick as they came on. You just realize that it's not there anymore. Sometimes though, if they're very painful, we have to drain them. But they're called popliteal cysts. Okay, and plantar is the sole of the foot. Plantar, sole of the foot. That's just a few definitions that I want you to be aware of. Okay, abdominal pelvic regions. Abdominal pelvic regions. The first thing I want you to know about these is that we have 9. Okay? So we have 9 abdominal pelvic regions. And here they are. So we have the right hypochondriac region, left hypochondriac region, epigastric, right and left lumbar region, you notice this flank there, umbilical region, right iliac, left iliac, hypogastric. Why do we do this? Why do we care? For. And when is it used a lot?
Palpation.
Pain, yeah, pain, outpatient. During surgery, the surgeon will refer to these different regions, so, you know, this is where I'm working. The liver is, you'll notice the majority of the liver is in the epigastric region. Now we have 9 regions of the abdominopelvic cavity, but we only have 4 abdominal quadrants. 4 abdominal quadrants. We have a right upper, a left upper, right lower, and that's where our appendix is. And I want you to highlight that. I want you to know that. If your patient is suffering from appendicitis, where are they going to have the pain? Right. You got it. The right lower quadrant. And then we have the left lower quadrant. And that's what it looks like. Okay, so far? Okay, we're almost done here. Directional terms. Most of these are pretty easy. Right, superior, and inferior. Okay. Superior and inferior, you want to think, superior is anything closest to the head, inferior is anything closest to the feet. I would recommend when you're studying these to use them in a sentence. So for instance, the head is superior to the neck. Or we could say the neck is inferior to the head. Anterior, ventral, and posterior, dorsal. So we could say the back is posterior or dorsal to the chest. Right? Or we could say the chest is anterior or ventral to the back. Okay. What about medial lateral?
Medials towards the middle, laterals towards the out.
You got it. So we could say the nose is medial to the ear. Or we could say the ear is lateral to the nose. Proximal and distal. You want to write this in your notes. We only use the terms proximal and distal when we are referring to our limbs, to our arms and legs. That's the only time. So for instance, I could say the shoulder is proximal to the elbow. Or I could say the shoulder is proximal to the wrist. Why is the shoulder proximal to both of those?
It's closest to the trunk.
Yeah, the shoulder is closest to the trunk, okay? Or you could say the wrist is distal to the shoulder, right, because it's further away. For the leg, you could say the knee is proximal to the ankle. Or you could say the ankle is distal to the knee. Okay, but that's the only time we use proximal and distal. Superficial and deep. Superficial means closest to the surface. So I could say that my skin is superficial to my muscles. Or I could say my muscles are deep to my skin. Superficial. And here's all the verbiage for each one. I'm not going to read them all, but I'll let you do that. But that's what I just said. Okay, let's talk about body planes and sections. Body planes and sections. The only ones that I'm really want you to focus on is the top three. The sagittal and the frontal or parental plane. And in your notes you want to put, we often use coronal when we're talking about frontal. There's a coronal suture, that's in the front. So here's a nice visual of the terms we talked about: superior, inferior, proximal, distal, and posterior and anterior. So let's look at these planes. I want you to know the verbiage. The sagittal plane runs front to back. I want you to know it runs front to back. So sections through this plane divide the body into right and left halves. So think about what it says for a minute, and then I'm going to show you the picture. Front to back, and the sections through the plane of the body will be into right and left sides. So here's our sagittal plane. Are you okay with that? Pretty self-explanatory. The frontal plane runs lengthwise, side to side, and divides the body or part into anterior and posterior. How else would you say this? Front and back. Front or back. It's right here, the plane. And the last one is the transverse plane. It's a crosswise plane and it divides the body into upper and lower parts. And that's what we see right here. And when do we use these? When is this important?
We were looking at organs and inside of them.
Yeah, absolutely, especially, like during dissections, if we're, let's say our patient died of Alzheimer's. I don't know if you knew this, but Alzheimer's, yes, we give that diagnosis to the patient when they're alive, but when they die and we do the autopsy, that's when it's 100% that that's what they had, is Alzheimer's.
Brain plaques and brains.
Yeah, have you ever, seen a brain that, had Alzheimer's? So one of the things that happens is that it atrophies. So it's much, much smaller than a normal sized brain. And it has what we call senile plaques all the way through it. And I'll show you when we dissect the sheep brain, I'll give you an idea of what that looks like. But wherever you see those plaques, there's no firing going on anymore, right? So that's why Alzheimer's can be a very fast progression, or it could be very slow. So they, start out where they're losing their short-term memory. They usually retain their long-term memory for a long time. But then it gets to the point where they don't even remember to swallow. They don't know how. So we use these planes because when we make our dissection cuts, depending on what plane we use, we can see different things, especially in the Alzheimer's plane. So it's really, really interesting. Okay, a few more terms. I want you to know lumen or luminal is a hollow area in organs. It's called the lumen, such as the stomach, small intestines, airways of the lungs, blood vessels, urinary organs, and so on. One big place where you'll find a huge lumen is the aorta of the heart. And I'll show you when we dissect the heart. The lumen is huge in that blood vessel, the aorta. I want you to know that the central nervous system includes the brain and the spinal cord. And that's easy because the brain, which would be up here if it was here, the brain and the spinal cord are centrally located in the body. So it's easy. So if I ask you what's in the central nervous system, it's the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system includes everything else, all the nerves. So it would be all the nerves that are out that go out into the periphery. Medullary refers to the inner region or core of the brain. So if I had a kidney in my hand and I cut it in half. Is what?
I have a picture of a kidney cut in half.
Oh, well, there you go, yeah, okay. So the middle part is gonna be the medulla, and the outside part of the kidney will be the cortex. And that's cortical, refers to the outer region or layer of an organ. So I want you to know that. So in the future, when we start talking about organs, if I say the cortex of the kidney, I want you to think of the outer region of that kidney. If I say, I want to talk about the medulla of the kidney, I want you to think of the middle of that kidney. Now, basal refers to the base or the widest part of the region. So, let's see. I don't think I have one in here. You can think of, as a matter of fact, let me find it. Hold on just a second. Okay. So when we're talking about the base of an organ, I want you to think of the widest part of that organ. And if we look at our heart here, this top part would be the base. And the opposite of basal is apical. And for the heart, apical means the narrowest part of the organ. And for the heart, it would be the apex right here, and that's the most narrow part. So try to remember that again as we move forward. And if I talk about the base of the heart, I'm talking about the most widest part, which is up at the top. If I'm talking about the apical or the apex of the heart, it's going to be the most narrow, and that's right here. I tried to throw in a little bit of medical terminology in here for you because for the organs, they don't offer medical terminology. I'm not quite sure why, but anyway. I'll try to throw them in when I can. So the structure and function of the body undergo changes over the early years, the developmental processes, and the late years, aging processes. Infancy and old age are periods when the body functions least as well. Right? Babies rely solely on their electrical part of the brain. And as they get older and as the brain grows, it gets more chemical. And then the hormones and the neurotransmitters start kicking in. When we age, what happens? What happens when you get older? You tend to do what?
Everything slows down.
Everything slows down, you start to go back
To infancy.
yeah, in some cases. Young adulthood is the period of greatest homeostatic efficiency. So for my young students in here, really, hold on for as long as you can. Every decade it's, you feel it. And what does homeostasis mean again?
The balance of the body.
Yeah, the body, it's where the body is balanced. It's a relatively constant. It does change though, but there's just a very small window for which that change can occur. Every organ, regardless of location or function, changes over time. In a healthy young adult, all body systems are matured and fully operational. The changes and functions that occur during the early years are called developmental processes. Aging processes occur during the late years. And I want you to know this term, atrophy. Atrophy is a term used to describe the wasting effects of advanced age. The wasting effects of advanced age. Now, we don't always, this term is not just used for this stuff. If I'm in a car accident and I break my leg and I'm not walking for a while, my muscles are going to atrophy. What do we call, if I'm a bodybuilder and I got these great big muscles, what's that called? It's not atrophy, it's actually called hypertrophy, right? Because I'm making the muscles really big, okay, so hypertrophy.